Hi there, this is a Polish Up Your Pedagogy video on feedback as part of formative assessment. It's part 5 out of 6 videos. My name's Janie Henderson and I'm part of the pedagogy team. So here's how our session today links with the GTC standards for full registration. It addresses standard 3.14 and it also links to East Lothian's expectations of high quality teaching and learning, as outlined on the learning cell. It states that learners have regular opportunities throughout the learning process to demonstrate their progress and achievement through well-planned formative and summative assessments appropriate to individual needs. And that learners engage with timely, ongoing, actionable feedback to understand their progress and next steps. So today's aims are to develop an understanding of the importance of feedback to move learning forwards and to outline some practical ideas of how to give learners effective feedback. Shirley Clark supports the understanding that formative assessment is a process. She describes formative assessment as a set of teaching and learning processes that empower children not only to progress but also to become owners of their own learning. She states that there are 5 elements to formative assessment that overlap and depend on each other if they are to be effective. The element that sits on the left of this diagram is the importance of giving learners feedback on their learning that recognises successes but also supports bringing about improvement. Dylan William describes feedback as a recipe for future action. Feedback is a way of giving learners information about their learning that moves the learning forward in some way. Shirley Clark insists it's only worthwhile if it actually improves the learning. So when is feedback most effective? Well, when the self-efficacy of the learner is high enough to receive feedback. It's important that the learner is self-assured and able to take on board comments made. They need to have the confidence and growth mindset to see the information that they are given as a chance to learn and further improve. It is effective when the relationship between the teacher, who is giving the feedback, and the learner is positive. It needs to be built on trust. It is also effective when it matches the stage of learning of the learner or topic. Perhaps it is feedback at surface level when the focus is around identifying and naming ideas linked to the success criteria. Or maybe the feedback is for deeper learning when feedback starts to make relationships between ideas. Or for the transfer or automatic stage of learning, which is about the application. Feedback here is about applying prior knowledge to other contexts. Feedback is also effective when it is immediate, but only sometimes delayed. In-the-moment feedback has the most impact on learning because a learner can act on that feedback immediately rather than having to wait until the next lesson to act upon any written feedback that has been written in a jotter. It is effective when it is interpreted or understood correctly. Is it specific enough for the learner to understand what they now need to do to improve? And finally, is it acted upon? Is time given for the student to use the feedback to improve performance and learning? So feedback can be given in different ways. Research shows that when verbal praise is given, it needs to be linked to something within a learner's control, for example, their effort. The amount of praise isn't as important as the quality of the praise that is given. Too much praise isn't necessarily a good thing. Written constructive comments can also be given verbally or in written form. Studies show that when grades or scores are used on a task, learners will compare themselves immediately with other learners, and this can lead to complacency for high achievers and demoralisation for lower achievers. However, a constructive comment is far more likely to improve learning than a grade or score for a task. Yet when both a constructive comment and a grade are displayed for the learner to see, research shows that the learner goes straight to the grade as their main source of feedback. But learning gains are greatest when only a comment is provided. However, the content of this comment is crucial. The comment needs to link to the learning goals or the learning intentions and success criteria that are shared with the learners. Shirley Clark insists that feedback should give information about the learner's achievements, and we should always start with the successes. But it must also tell the learner what they need to do now to improve further. Telling the learner what's next is crucial, and included in this information must be how they can improve. For example, there's no point in informing a learner that they need to use question marks and exclamation marks more accurately in their writing next time if they don't know how to do that. If they don't know when to use a question mark or an exclamation mark, and maybe they don't know what those punctuation marks will look like. The timing of feedback is also crucial. William argues that giving feedback too early in a task means that students actually learn less. He says feedback should cause thinking, and giving too much feedback or feedback too early in a lesson can actually reduce learners' ability to think for themselves about how to complete an activity or solve a problem. So how can we give learners feedback? Whole class feedback involves providing feedback to the whole class or group of learners on their overall performance, rather than individual feedback to each learner. It can generate whole class discussions where you can unpick common mistakes or errors. We can give whole class feedback at the start of a lesson. Feedback is information linked to performance of a task, so we can share the successes from the previous lesson first. In this example, a group of learners were looking at poetry. In the previous lesson, they'd written a poem about winter, so the teacher shared what went well. In this case, everyone in the class had written 4 lines or more, but also they had written good similes in the poetry writing. These were shared to acknowledge and celebrate examples of excellence. Next steps were then identified, and in this example, almost all pupils had used similes in their poems, but they hadn't all used metaphors. So this was then the focus for that day's lesson, and a together task was used to create some metaphors. These modelled examples were then displayed on the interactive board for learners to use and add to when they moved on to completing or improving their poem individually or with a partner. Having a mid-lesson learning stop and sharing learning under a visualiser is a brilliant way of sharing successful learning and identifying what next. A mid-lesson stop enables learners to check they are on track. It enables everyone to come together to share thoughts or ideas about a piece of work. As the teacher, you can ask, "What do we like about this piece of work and why?" before moving on to improvements. This celebrates the achievements of this learner's work and allows those learners who are finding a task challenging a further modelled example to help them complete the task successfully. As the teacher, you can identify by highlighting or underlining the successes and add in or mark where improvements can be made. Being on the move around your classroom, or helicoptering as it's sometimes called, while children are completing their task enables you to land or stop and check in with learners and give immediate feedback. It gives you the chance to catch or spot learners who are maybe off task or stuck or need support and have made some mistakes and offer them feedback to support them to move forward. It is important that the teacher points out successes before improvements and identifying what next. It's important to suggest one specific improvement rather than many and link them to the learning intention and success criteria for the lesson, remembering to explain how to do that. If learners are engaged in discussion about the task with a partner or small group, then when helicoptering, don't interrupt them. They may be asking and answering their own questions at this moment with their peers, and that moment will be lost. It's back to thinking about the timing of feedback that we mentioned earlier. Providing 2 stars and a wish on learners' work is another way of giving feedback. It involves giving the learner feedback on their successes, which are the 2-star comments written underneath this piece of work. And the wish, which is the learner's next step, is also written below. All comments written should be linked to the learning intention and success criteria. So all of these practical ideas can be used to provide specific feedback to learners that moves learning forward. They should be built in to your lesson plans. So you may want to now consider these challenge questions from Higgius 4. Thinking about the knowledge and the approaches described in this video, how well do we make use of a range of valid, reliable and relevant assessment tools and approaches to support the improvement of children and young people? And how well do we apply the principles of planning, observation, assessment, recording and reporting as an integral feature of learning and teaching? Thanks for listening.